The empty one, 19 years old, barefoot in frozen fields, hands bleeding from the harvest. This is where Lena worked. This is where nobody looked. The village of Dusk Hollow had a rule. Don't look at the empty ones. Don't acknowledge them. Don't waste your breath. Lena had learned this rule when she was 14 years old, on a winter evening that changed everything. The chapel keeper had tested her blood like he tested every child in the village. 1 drop, 1 silver needle, 1 black stone bowl, and then nothing. No light, no warmth, no change in the air. Empty. That single word had erased her from existence. Her mother cried in the back pew. Her stepfather didn't even look at her. He just closed a door inside himself and never opened it again. By spring, Lena was sleeping in the shed near the root cellar. By summer, she was eating after everyone else. By autumn, the village children called her Hollow Girl when they wanted to be cruel. And by 19, she worked everywhere decent people preferred not to look. But on this particular winter evening, the evening that would change everything, something was about to happen that would make the entire village regret ever turning their backs on her. The fields were frozen solid. Snow fell in thick, suffocating sheets. Lena's fingers were numb, but she kept working. She always kept working. That's what empty people did. They worked until their bodies gave out. She didn't notice the figure on horseback at first. She didn't notice the way the snow seemed to part around him like he was cutting through water. She didn't notice the way the wind stopped howling when he approached. She didn't notice any of it until he was standing directly in front of her, and by then, it was too late to run. You. 1 word, that's all he said, but it wasn't a question. It was a command, a statement, a recognition of something she didn't understand. Lena looked up. The man on the horse was older, maybe 45, maybe older. His face was sharp, carved from stone. His eyes were dark, impossibly dark, like looking into a well with no bottom. He wore a black coat that seemed to absorb the light around him, and when he moved, it was with the precision of a predator who had been hunting for centuries. Because that's exactly what he was. Coronel Matthias, the Vampire Supreme, the oldest, most powerful being in Dusk Hollow. The man who owned the village, the fields, the very air they breathed. He was a legend, whispered in darkness, a name spoken only when absolutely necessary. And he was looking directly at Lena. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice low and cutting like a scalpel. Lena's throat tightened. She had never been spoken to directly by anyone of importance. She had been invisible for so long that the act of being seen felt like a violation. "Lena," she whispered. He tilted his head slightly. "Lena what?" "Just Lena." A pause. A long, suffocating pause where the only sound was the wind and the falling snow and the thundering of her own heartbeat. "Step closer," he commanded. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to run, but she didn't run. She stepped closer. When Coronel Matthias looked into her eyes, something shifted in the universe. His pupils dilated. His breathing changed. His hand, which had been resting casually on the reins of his horse, suddenly gripped so tightly that the leather creaked. For the first time in 347 years, the Vampire Supreme felt something he had never felt before. Fear. Not fear of her. Fear of what she represented. Fear of what her eyes contained. Because in those eyes, those ordinary human empty eyes, he saw something that should not exist. He saw a void, a complete and absolute absence of everything he could control, everything he could manipulate, everything he could consume. He saw his own extinction. "Where do you come from?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper now. "The village," Lena answered. "I work the fields." But that wasn't what he was asking, and they both knew it. He was asking, "How is it possible that you exist? How is it possible that I cannot read you? How is it possible that every instinct I have developed over 3 centuries is screaming at me that you are the most dangerous thing I have ever encountered?" Coronel Matthias reached into his coat and pulled out a small object. It was old, made of silver, with symbols carved into its surface that Lena did not recognize. He held it out to her. "Take this," he said. Lena hesitated. "Take it," he repeated, and this time it was not a request. She took the object. It was warm despite the freezing cold around them, and the moment her skin touched the silver, she felt something shift inside her chest. A recognition, a calling, a door opening to a part of herself she didn't know existed. "What is this?" she asked. "Insurance," he said. "Keep it close. You will need it." And then he turned his horse around and rode back toward the mansion on the hill, leaving Lena standing alone in the frozen field, holding an object she didn't understand, feeling a connection to a man she had never met before. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She lay in her shed near the root cellar, staring at the silver object in her hands. It was warm. It was always warm. And the longer she held it, the more she felt like something inside her was waking up. Something that had been sleeping for 19 years. Something that the village had tried to kill by calling her empty. But what if she wasn't empty? What if she was something else entirely? The next morning, Coronel Matthias sent for her. Not as a worker, not as a servant, as a guest. And when Lena walked through the doors of his mansion for the first time, she had no idea that she was walking into a story that would change not just her life, but the fate of every vampire in Dusk Hollow. She had no idea that the man who had rejected her village was about to become obsessed with her. She had no idea that her emptiness was actually the most powerful thing that had ever existed. And she had absolutely no idea that by the end of this story, she would be the one holding the power of life and death in her hands. But before we continue, I have to ask you something. Where did you hear this story? Who told you about Lena? About the Vampire Supreme? About the girl who was rejected by an entire village, only to become the most feared woman in Dusk Hollow? Because this isn't just a story about love. This isn't just a story about power. This is a story about what happens when the most powerful being on Earth meets the one person he cannot control. And the question is, do you have the courage to watch until the very end? Because the ending will change everything you thought you knew about who the real monster is. If you do, then let's continue to Chapter 2. But I'm warning you, there's no going back after this. The doors of the mansion opened like the mouth of something ancient and alive. Lena stepped inside and felt the temperature drop another 10 degrees. The air was thick with the scent of cedarwood, old leather, and something else, something metallic that made her teeth ache. The entrance hall was vast. Stone walls rose 3 stories high, and a grand staircase curved upward like a spine. Portraits of men with Matthias's face hung on every wall, each one older than the last, each one with the same dark, predatory eyes. How many generations? How many centuries had this family ruled Dusk Hollow? A woman appeared from the shadows. She was tall, pale, with silver hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her skin. Her eyes were red, not from crying, but from something else entirely. She looked at Lena the way a snake looks at a mouse. "So you are the one," the woman said. Her voice was like ice cracking. "I am Katerina," she continued, "the Colonel's advisor. He has requested that you be given quarters in the East Wing. You will not leave those quarters without permission. You will not speak to the other servants. You will not ask questions. Do you understand?" Lena nodded. "I asked if you understand," Katerina repeated, stepping closer. "Use your voice." "Yes," Lena whispered. "I understand." Katerina's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Good. The Coronel does not like disobedience." "And neither do I." The East Wing was isolated. Lena's room was small but immaculate, a bed with white sheets, a wooden chair, a mirror, a window that looked out onto the frozen gardens. There was a fireplace, and it was already burning. Someone had prepared this room for her arrival. Someone had known she was coming. She sat on the edge of the bed and held the silver object Matthias had given her. It was still warm. She turned it over in her hand, studying the symbols carved into its surface. They looked ancient. They looked like a language she should understand, but didn't. That night she didn't sleep. She lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the mansion, footsteps in the hallway, doors opening and closing, voices speaking in a language she didn't recognize. And underneath it all, a sound like wind, like breathing, like something vast and hungry moving through the walls. At midnight there was a knock on her door. Lena's heart stopped. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. The knock came again. "Come in," she said, her voice barely audible. The door opened. It was Matias. He wore a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and she could see the veins in his forearms, dark, pulsing like they contained something other than blood. His eyes were different now, hungrier, more dangerous. "You couldn't sleep," he said. "It wasn't a question." "No," Lena admitted. He walked to the window and looked out at the frozen gardens. "The silver object I gave you. Do you know what it is?" "No, it is a key," he said. "A key to something inside you that has been locked away since birth. The village called you empty because they could not sense what you truly are. But I can feel it. I can feel it like a wound that will not close." He turned to face her. "What is your mother's name?" The question caught her off guard. "Elena." "Why?" Something flickered across his face. Pain, recognition, fear. "And your father? Do you know his name?" "No. He left before I was born." Matias walked closer. He reached out and touched her face with one cold finger, tracing the line of her cheekbone. "You have his eyes. I would recognize them anywhere. I would recognize them across 3 centuries. Lena pulled away. "What are you talking about?" "Tomorrow you will begin your real work," he said, ignoring her question. "Not in the fields, not as a servant. You will work in the library. You will read the old books. You will learn the history of this place. And you will learn what you truly are. And if I refuse?" Lena asked, surprising herself with her own boldness. Matias smiled. It was not a kind smile. "You won't refuse, because you already know that refusing is not an option. You felt it the moment you saw me in the field. You felt it the moment you touched the silver. You felt it the moment you walked through these doors. You're bound to me now, Lena, whether you like it or not." He turned and walked toward the door, but before he left, he paused. "The silver object you are holding," he said without turning around, "keep it with you always, because very soon you will understand why I gave it to you. And when you do, everything will change." The door closed behind him. Lena sat in the darkness, holding the warm silver object, feeling something inside her chest beginning to crack open, something that had been sealed away for 19 years, something that the village had tried to destroy by calling her empty. But what if she wasn't empty? What if she was something far more dangerous? What if she was the reason the Vampire Supreme, the most powerful being in Dusk Hollow, was afraid? The Library of Secrets, the library was older than the mansion itself. Lena could feel it the moment she stepped inside, the weight of centuries pressing down from the vaulted ceiling. The smell of aged paper and leather bindings, the cold that seemed to emanate from the very stones. Dust particles floated through shafts of pale winter light, and the shelves stretched endlessly in every direction, disappearing into shadow. Matias was waiting for her at a mahogany desk in the center of the room. He wore the same black shirt as the night before, and his eyes tracked her movement with the precision of a hunter watching prey. "You will start here," he said, gesturing to a stack of leather-bound journals. "These are the family records, birth dates, death dates, bloodlines, everything you need to understand what you are." Lena approached the desk slowly. The journals were ancient, their spines cracked with age. She picked up the first one and opened it carefully. The handwriting inside was elegant but harsh, each letter carved into the page like a confession. "Read," Matias commanded, "and when you find your name, come find me." He left her alone in the library. Lena sat at the desk and began to read. The first journal dated back to 1623. It was written in a language she barely recognized, Old Portuguese mixed with something else, something that made her head ache when she tried to pronounce the words in her mind. But slowly, as she read, the meaning became clear. These were not just family records. They were a chronicle of power, of transformation, of blood rituals and ancient pacts. Each entry described the creation of a new vampire, the binding of a new servant, the conquest of new territory. And at the center of it all was a name that appeared again and again: Matthias. Always Matthias. Matthias in 1650, Matthias in 1750, Matthias in 1850. The same man, the same face, the same dark, predatory eyes. 347 years old. Lena's hands trembled as she turned the pages. She was reading the history of a monster. And somewhere in these journals her name was waiting. She found it in the 4th volume, dated 1987. No, that couldn't be right. 1987 was only 39 years ago. She was 19. She should have been born in 2007. But there it was, written in Matthias's own handwriting. Elena Volkov gave birth to a daughter on March 15, 1987. The child was marked as empty at birth. No trace of the vampire bloodline, no sign of the old magic. The village keeper confirmed it. She is useless, but I know better. I have seen this before. The void is not weakness. The void is a shield. I have hidden her among the humans. When she's old enough, when she's ready, I will bring her home. And then everything will change. Lena's breath came in short, sharp gasps. Her mother's name was Elena. Elena Volkov. Not Elena from the village. Elena Volkov. A vampire name. A name that meant something. And Matthias had known about her all along. She heard footsteps behind her and spun around. It was Katerina, the pale woman with the red eyes. She was holding a silver tray with a glass of red liquid on it. "The colonel thought you might be thirsty," Katerina said, her voice dripping with something that might have been amusement or might have been malice. "He said you would understand what this is by now." Lena looked at the glass. The liquid was dark, almost black in the dim light. She knew what it was. She had always known, on some level. The scent of it made her mouth water and her stomach turn at the same time. "I don't understand," Lena whispered. "Of course you don't," Katerina said, setting the glass down on the desk. "You have been living as a human for 19 years. But you are not human, Lena. You never were. You are a Volkov. And Volkovs do not drink water." Katerina turned to leave, then paused at the door. "The colonel will expect you in his study at sunset. Do not be late, and do not refuse what he offers you." The last person who refused the colonel, she smiled and her fangs extended slightly. Well, let's just say she is no longer in a position to refuse anything. The door closed behind her. Lena stared at the glass of blood. Her hands were shaking. Her vision was blurring. Every instinct in her body was screaming at her to drink it, to consume it, to let it fill the void inside her that had been empty for 19 years. But she didn't touch it. Instead, she went back to the journals and kept reading. She read about her mother, Elena Volkov, a vampire of considerable power who had fallen in love with a human man, a Russian doctor named Alexei. She read about how Matthias had forbidden the relationship, how Elena had defied him and gotten pregnant anyway. She read about how Matthias had taken the newborn daughter and hidden her among the humans as punishment, as a way to break Elena's spirit. And she read about how, 3 months after giving birth, Elena Volkov had walked into the frozen forest and never come back. Lena closed the journal and pressed her forehead against the cold mahogany desk. Her mother was dead. Her father was a ghost. And the man who had orchestrated it all was waiting for her in his study at sunset. The sun was already beginning to set when she heard the bell chime somewhere in the mansion. The light from the windows turned blood red, and the shadows in the library seemed to deepen and move with a life of their own. Lena stood up. She left the glass of blood untouched on the desk. And she walked toward Matthias's study, knowing that whatever happened next would change her forever. The study door was heavy oak, carved with symbols that matched the ones on the silver object she still carried in her pocket. She knocked. "Come in," Matthias said from inside. She opened the door and stepped into a room that smelled like old leather, expensive whiskey, and something else, something ancient and hungry. Matthias was standing by a fireplace, his silhouette dark against the flames. When he turned to face her, his eyes were glowing red. "You found your name," he said. It wasn't a question. You knew, Lena said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. You knew all along what I was. I knew what you could become, Matthias corrected. There is a difference. Your mother was powerful, but she was weak in the ways that mattered. She loved a human. She defied me. She paid the price. He paused. But you, Lena Volkov, you are different. You have spent 19 years invisible. 19 years learning what it means to have nothing. And that makes you dangerous in ways your mother could never be. He stepped closer, and Lena could see the veins in his neck pulsing with dark blood, could see the hunger in his eyes, could feel the weight of his power pressing down on her like a physical force. I brought you here to offer you a choice, he said. You can return to the village. You can go back to being empty, being invisible, being nothing. Or you can accept what you truly are. You can drink from the source. You can become what your bloodline demands. You can become a vampire. He extended his wrist toward her. The skin was pale, almost translucent, and she could see the dark veins beneath the surface, pulsing with ancient blood. But if you do, he continued, you will be bound to me, not as a servant, not as a possession, but as something far more complicated. You will be my anchor, my weakness, the one thing in this world that I cannot control, and therefore the one thing I cannot live without. Lena looked at his wrist. She could smell the blood now calling to something deep inside her that had been sleeping for 19 years. She could feel her fangs beginning to extend, could feel her body beginning to transform into something other than human. And she understood in that moment that Matthias was not offering her a choice at all. He was offering her a trap. But it was a trap she was already caught in. The binding Lena's fangs extended fully as she stared at Matthias's wrist. The hunger was overwhelming now, a primal force that consumed every rational thought. Her vision had shifted. The room was no longer in shades of gray and shadow, but in layers of heat and cold, of blood and breath. She could see the pulse of his veins like a map leading to salvation. Drink, Matthias commanded, his voice low and hypnotic. She hesitated for only a moment. Then she leaned forward and sank her fangs into his wrist. The blood that flooded her mouth was nothing like the glass Katerina had left in the library. This was ancient. This was power. This was 347 years of dominion, of conquest, of absolute control over life and death. It burned through her veins like liquid fire, and with each pull, she felt something inside her awakening, not just her vampire nature, but something deeper, something that had been waiting for this moment since the day she was born. Matthias didn't pull away. He stood perfectly still, his breathing shallow, his eyes fixed on her face. And Lena realized, in that moment of clarity between hunger and ecstasy, that he was experiencing something too. Something he had not expected. Pain, the moment her fangs pierced his skin. A connection formed between them, not the usual vampire bond of master and servant, but something far more complex. A binding, a tether, a chain that worked both ways. She could feel his thoughts now, could feel his memories flooding into her consciousness like a tidal wave. She saw centuries of bloodshed. She saw the founding of Dusk Hollow. She saw the creation of the vampire bloodlines. She saw the moment he had discovered her mother, Elena Volkov, and the moment he had decided to punish her by taking away her child. And she saw something else, something that made her stop drinking and pull away from his wrist. She saw his death, not a metaphorical death, a literal, physical death that was coming for him. A curse that had been placed on his bloodline 300 years ago by a witch he had wronged. A curse that was slowly consuming him from the inside, eating away at his immortality, turning his eternal life into a countdown to oblivion. He had maybe 6 months left, perhaps less. Lena stumbled backward, her hand covering her mouth. Blood, his blood, dripped from her fangs. You see it now, Matthias said quietly. He was holding his wrist, and dark blood was seeping between his fingers, but he didn't seem to care. You see why I brought you here. You see why I have been watching you since you were born. You're dying, Lena whispered. Yes, and you think I can save you? I know you can, Matius said. He walked to a cabinet and pulled out a crystal decanter filled with amber liquid. He poured himself a glass and drank it in one long swallow. The curse that is killing me was placed by a witch who had a gift, the ability to bind magic to blood, to make it so that only someone with the opposite gift could break it, someone empty of magic, someone void of power, someone like you. He turned to face her, and his eyes were no longer red. They were black, completely black, like looking into an abyss. But there is a problem, he continued. The binding only works if the person who breaks the curse is willing, if they choose to do it, if they love the person they are saving enough to sacrifice their own power to do so. I don't love you, Lena said, her voice sharp as broken glass. I don't even know you. Not yet, Matius agreed, but you will, because I'm going to make sure of it. He set down his glass and walked toward her. She tried to back away, but her legs wouldn't obey. The blood she had drunk from him was still coursing through her veins, still connecting her to him, still binding her to his will. What did you do to me? She demanded. I gave you a choice, Matius said. You drank from me. You accepted the transformation. And in doing so, you accepted the bond. You are no longer empty, Lena. You are no longer invisible. You are now a vampire. And you are bound to me until the day one of us dies. He reached out and touched her face, his fingers cold against her skin. But here is the beautiful part. The binding works both ways. You can feel my thoughts. I can feel yours. You can sense my pain. I can sense your fear. We are connected now in a way that no two beings have ever been connected before. And that connection is going to force you to care about me, whether you want to or not. Lena jerked away from his touch. That's not love. That's slavery. Perhaps, Matius said, and for the first time something that might have been regret flickered across his face. But it is the only way I know how to survive. And survival, my dear Lena, is all that matters in this world. He walked to the door and opened it. Katerina was waiting in the hallway, her red eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Take her to the transformation chamber, Matius instructed. She will need to feed properly, and she will need to understand what she has become. Katerina's smile widened. Of course, Coronel. Come, little Volkov. Let me show you what it means to be truly alive. Lena followed Katerina through the mansion, her mind reeling. The blood in her veins was still burning, still connecting her to Matius, still pulling her toward him, even as she tried to resist. She could feel his presence in her mind like a second heartbeat, could feel his hunger, could feel his desperation, and underneath it all she could feel something else, something that terrified her more than anything else. She could feel his love, not the love of a man for a woman, but the love of a predator for its prey, the love of a master for his most prized possession, the love of someone who had been alone for 347 years and had finally found the one thing that could make him feel alive again. The transformation chamber was in the basement of the mansion. It was a vast stone room with a stone table in the center and chains hanging from the walls. The air smelled like copper and old magic, and in the corner there was a figure chained to the wall. It was a man. He was pale, emaciated, with hollow eyes and scars covering every inch of his exposed skin. He looked up when Lena entered, and she saw recognition flash across his face. Another one, he whispered, his voice like wind through a graveyard. Another one for the Coronel's collection. Silence, Katerina snapped, and the man flinched as if he had been struck. What is this? Lena demanded. Who is he? He is a lesson, Katerina said coldly. He is what happens when you refuse the Coronel, when you resist the bond, when you try to fight against your nature. She gestured to the chains. He has been here for 3 years. He will be here for 3 more. And then, when the Coronel is finished with him, he will be released into the forest to die slowly, painfully, alone. Lena looked at the chained man, and she understood. This was Matias's way of showing her what would happen if she refused him. This was his way of demonstrating the consequences of defiance. And it was working. She could feel her resistance crumbling, could feel the bond between her and Matthias pulling her deeper into his web, could feel herself beginning to care about him, beginning to want to save him, beginning to understand that her only way out was to go deeper in. "Feed," Katerina commanded, gesturing to the chained man. "You are a vampire now. You must learn to hunt. You must learn to kill. You must learn to embrace what you are." Lena looked at the man. She could smell his blood, could feel the hunger rising in her again, could feel the predator inside her demanding to be fed. And she realized in that moment that she was no longer the empty girl from the village. She was something far more dangerous. She was a vampire. And she was beginning to understand that Matthias had not saved her from her emptiness. He had awakened it. The curse revealed the blood on Lena's lips was still warm when Matthias found her in the transformation chamber. She was standing over the chained man, her body trembling, her eyes still glowing red. The man was unconscious, his neck bearing the marks of her fangs, his breathing shallow but steady. She had not killed him. She had simply fed. And in feeding, she had felt something shift inside her consciousness. Matthias approached slowly, his footsteps silent against the stone floor. When he reached her, he did not touch her. He simply stood beside her and looked down at the unconscious man. "Good," he said quietly. "You are learning." Lena turned to face him, and he saw the conflict in her eyes. The hunger satisfied, but the humanity horrified. The predator awakened, but the woman still fighting against it. "What have you done to me?" she whispered. "I have given you what you were always meant to have," Matthias replied. He gestured to Katerina, who emerged from the shadows and began unchaining the man. "Take him to the infirmary. Let him recover. He will be useful again soon." Katerina obeyed without question, dragging the unconscious man away and disappearing into the darkness of the basement corridors. When they were alone, Matthias turned to Lena and extended his hand. "Come. There is something you need to see, something that will explain everything." She hesitated, but the bond between them pulled her forward. She took his hand, and the moment their skin touched, a wave of his memories flooded into her mind. She saw flashes of centuries, battles fought in darkness, kingdoms built on blood, lovers taken and lost, power accumulated and wielded with absolute precision. And underneath it all, she saw the curse. It was like a living thing, a dark serpent coiled around his heart, slowly consuming him from the inside. She could feel its hunger, could feel the way it was eating away at his immortality, turning his eternal life into a countdown to death. Matthias led her through the mansion to a chamber she had not seen before. It was hidden behind a wall in his private study, accessible only through a door that appeared to be solid stone until he touched it with his palm. The chamber was circular, with walls covered in ancient symbols and runes. In the center was a stone altar, and on the altar lay a book bound in black leather. "This is the Book of Binding," Matthias said, his voice echoing in the circular space. "It contains the record of every curse ever placed on my bloodline, every witch's vengeance, every enemy's final act of defiance, and the one that is killing me." He opened the book carefully, and Lena saw pages filled with handwriting in dozens of different languages, spanning centuries. Matthias turned to a page marked with a blood-red ribbon. 312 years ago, he began, I wronged a witch named Isabelle Moreau. She was powerful, one of the most powerful witches in all of Europe. I took something from her, something she could not live without. And when she discovered what I had done, she placed a curse on me, a curse that would slowly consume my immortality, turning my eternal life into a slow death. A curse that could only be broken by someone who possessed the opposite gift, someone empty of magic, someone void of power, someone who could absorb the curse and neutralize it through the sheer force of their emptiness. He turned to face Lena, and his eyes were no longer red. They were black, filled with centuries of pain and regret. "I have spent 300 years searching for someone like you," he continued. someone with the gift of emptiness, someone who could save me. And then you were born. Your mother, Elena Volkov, was one of the most powerful vampires I had ever created. But you were born empty. No magic, no power, no gift. Just pure, absolute emptiness. So you hid me, Lena said, understanding flooding through her. You hid me among the humans so that I would grow up believing I was worthless, so that I would be broken, so that when you finally found me, I would be desperate enough to do whatever you asked. Yes, Matthias admitted, and there was no apology in his voice. I hid you because I needed you to understand what it meant to have nothing. I needed you to understand the value of emptiness, and I needed you to be willing to sacrifice everything to save me. Lena pulled her hand away from his, breaking the physical contact. But the bond between them remained, a constant presence in her mind, a tether that would not break. And if I refuse, she demanded, if I refuse to break your curse, what happens then? Then I die, Matthias said simply. In approximately 6 months, the curse will consume me completely, and I will cease to exist. My immortality will be stripped away, and I will age rapidly until there is nothing left but dust. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, more human. But that is not what concerns me most, he continued. What concerns me is what will happen to Dusk Hollow when I am gone. The other vampires, the ones who are bound to me through blood and magic, they will be released from their bonds. They will be free to do whatever they wish. And there are some among them who are far more dangerous than I am. There are some who would burn this village to the ground just for the pleasure of watching it burn. He walked to the altar and placed his hand on the book of binding. I have kept the peace in Dusk Hollow for 300 years. I have prevented the chaos that would come if the vampires were allowed to run wild. And when I die, that peace dies with me. Unless I save you, Lena finished. Unless you save me, Matthias confirmed. And in doing so, you save everyone in this village. You save the humans who live in fear of us. You save the vampires who depend on my leadership to keep them from destroying themselves. You save the entire world from the darkness that would be unleashed if I were to fall. Lena felt the weight of his words pressing down on her. She could feel the truth in them through the bond between them. She could feel his desperation, his fear, his genuine belief that he was the only thing standing between civilization and chaos, and she could also feel something else. She could feel his love for her. Not the possessive love of a predator for its prey, but something deeper. Something that had been growing inside him since the moment he saw her in the frozen field. Something that transcended the bond between them and existed on its own. He loved her, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. How do I break the curse? Lena asked, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Matthias turned to face her, and for the first time she saw hope flicker across his face. There's a ritual, he said. An ancient ritual that requires the blood of the cursed and the blood of the one who is empty of magic. The two bloods must be mixed together in a sacred vessel, and the words of unbinding must be spoken. If done correctly, the curse will be transferred from me to the vessel, and it will be neutralized by your emptiness. And if it is not done correctly, Lena asked, then you will absorb the curse instead of me, Matthias said quietly. You will become the one who is slowly dying. You will become the one counting down to oblivion. And I will be forced to watch you suffer the same fate that I have suffered for 300 years. Lena understood now why he had brought her here. Why he had transformed her. Why he had bound her to him through blood and magic. He was not just trying to save himself. He was trying to save her from a fate worse than death, the fate of being invisible, of being empty, of being nothing. And in doing so, he had made her the most important person in his world. When? Lena asked. Soon, Matthias replied. The ritual must be performed during the winter solstice. That gives us 3 weeks to prepare. 3 weeks for you to understand what you have become. 3 weeks for you to decide whether you are willing to sacrifice your emptiness to save me. He extended his hand to her again. Come, there is much you need to learn, and very little time to learn it. Lena took his hand, and as their skin touched, she felt the bond between them pulsed with a new intensity. She could feel his heartbeat synchronizing with hers, could feel his thoughts beginning to merge with her own, could feel herself being pulled deeper and deeper into his world, into his darkness, into his need. And she realized with a clarity that terrified her that she was no longer fighting against the bond. She was beginning to accept it. She was beginning to want it. And by the time the winter solstice arrived, she would be so completely bound to him that breaking the curse would be the only way to save herself. Matius had not just created a vampire, he had created a weapon, and that weapon was pointed directly at his own heart. The price of blood. 3 weeks passed like a fever dream. Lena moved through the mansion like a ghost, learning the ancient rituals, studying the symbols carved into stone, understanding the weight of the curse that was slowly consuming Matius from within. Each night she fed from the servants Katerina brought to the transformation chamber. Each night she felt herself becoming less human and more vampire. Each night the bond between her and Matius grew stronger, pulling her deeper into his darkness. But it was during the days that the real transformation happened. Matius taught her everything. He showed her the history of the Volkov bloodline, how her mother, Elena, had been one of the most powerful vampires ever created. He showed her the records of her father, Alexei, a human doctor who had fallen in love with Elena, despite knowing what she was. He showed her the moment of her birth and the moment Matius had made the decision to hide her away. Your mother begged me to let her keep you, Matius said one afternoon, standing in the library with a journal open in his hands. She said she would do anything. She said she would serve me for eternity if I would only let her raise you as her own. But I refused, because I knew that if she raised you, you would never understand the value of emptiness. You would never understand what it meant to have nothing. Lena listened without speaking. The bond between them allowed her to feel the truth of his words, to sense the conflict in his heart, to understand that he had genuinely believed he was doing the right thing. But understanding did not mean forgiving. On the night before the winter solstice, Matius brought her to the ritual chamber. It was a vast underground cavern far deeper than the transformation chamber, carved from black stone that seemed to absorb light. In the center was a stone altar, and on the altar lay 2 silver vessels, one filled with Matias's blood, dark and ancient, and one empty, waiting to be filled. Tomorrow night, at the moment of the solstice, we will perform the ritual, Matius said, his voice echoing through the cavern. Your blood will be mixed with mine in the empty vessel. The words of unbinding will be spoken, and the curse will be broken, and if it doesn't work, Lena asked, though she already knew the answer, then you will die slowly the way I have been dying, Matius said, and I will have to watch it happen, knowing that I caused it, knowing that my need for survival has destroyed the one person I have ever truly loved. Lena turned to face him. You don't love me. You love what I can do for you. You love the fact that I can save you. That's not love, Matius. That's desperation. Perhaps, Matius said, and he stepped closer. But desperation has kept me alive for 300 years. And desperation is what will keep you alive tomorrow night. He reached out and touched her face, his fingers cold against her skin. And through the bond between them, Lena felt something shift. She felt his fear. She felt his certainty that the ritual would work. She felt his absolute conviction that she would choose to save him. And she felt something else. She felt his doubt. For the first time since she had arrived at the mansion, Lena understood that Matius was not as certain as he pretended to be. He did not know if the ritual would work. He did not know if her emptiness would be enough to break the curse. He did not know if she would survive the process. And that uncertainty terrified him more than anything else. I need to know something, Lena said, pulling away from his touch. If the ritual fails, if I absorb the curse instead of you, Will you let me go? Will you release me from the bond? Matthias was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. No, he said, I will not let you go. Because if you are dying, then I will die with you. I will not survive without you, Lena. Not anymore. You have become the only thing that matters to me. The only thing that makes my existence bearable. Lena felt the truth of his words through the bond, and she realized in that moment that Matthias had made a terrible mistake. He had brought her to the mansion to save himself, but in doing so, he had made himself dependent on her in a way that transcended the curse. He had given her power over him that no magic could ever take away. She was no longer his prisoner. She was his master. That night, Lena did not sleep. She walked through the mansion, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on her. She passed the transformation chamber and heard the chained man crying softly in the darkness. She passed Katerina's quarters and felt the vampire's hunger radiating through the walls. She passed the rooms of the other servants and felt their fear, their desperation, their absolute dependence on Matthias for survival, and she understood, finally, what it meant to be a vampire. It was not power, it was not immortality, it was hunger. It was the constant gnawing need to consume, to dominate, to control. It was the slow erosion of humanity until nothing remained but the predator. She found herself in the library, standing before the Book of Binding. She opened it to the page marked with the blood-red ribbon and read the curse one more time. By the blood of the innocent, I bind you to slow death. By the power of the earth, I curse your immortality. By the will of the witch, I condemn you to oblivion. And only the empty one can break this chain. But only if she chooses love over power, sacrifice over survival, and death over eternity. Lena read the words again and again, and with each reading she understood more. The curse was not just about Matthias, it was about her. It was about the choice she would have to make. It was about whether she would choose to save him, knowing that in doing so, she might be condemning herself. And as she stood in the library holding the Book of Binding, Lena made a decision. She would perform the ritual. She would mix her blood with Matthias's. She would speak the words of unbinding, but she would not do it to save him. She would do it to save herself. Because she had finally understood what her emptiness truly meant. It was not a curse. It was not a weakness. It was a gift. It was the ability to absorb magic without being consumed by it. It was the ability to neutralize power without being destroyed by it. It was the ability to stand in the presence of the most powerful being in the world and remain completely, absolutely free. The winter solstice arrived with a blizzard that shook the mansion to its foundations. Snow fell in sheets so thick that the world beyond the windows disappeared completely. Inside, the ritual chamber was prepared. Candles burned in every corner, casting dancing shadows on the black stone walls. The two silver vessels sat on the altar, waiting. Matthias stood at the head of the altar, dressed in black robes that seemed to absorb the candlelight. His face was pale, almost translucent, and Lena could see the curse moving beneath his skin like a living thing. He had perhaps hours left, perhaps less. Are you ready? He asked, his voice steady despite the fear radiating through the bond. Yes, Lena said. She walked to the altar and took her place opposite him. Katerina stood to the side holding a silver knife. The other vampires of Dusk Hollow lined the walls of the chamber, silent witnesses to what was about to happen. Matthias extended his wrist. Katerina took the knife and made a precise cut, and dark blood began to flow into the first silver vessel. Then Katerina turned to Lena and extended the knife toward her. Lena did not hesitate. She extended her wrist and felt the blade bite into her skin. Her blood, bright red, alive, full of power, began to flow into the second vessel. Now, Matthias commanded, his voice taking on a ritualistic tone, mix the blood. Speak the words of unbinding. Break the curse. Lena picked up both vessels and poured them together into the empty vessel on the altar. The moment the two bloods mixed, the chamber erupted in light. The curse, the dark serpent that had been coiled around Matthias's heart, rose up from his body and manifested in the vessel, a writhing shadow of pure malice. And Lena began to speak the words of unbinding. But as she spoke, she felt something shift inside her. The curse was not being transferred to the vessel. It was being transferred to her. It was flowing through her veins, consuming her, burning her from the inside out. She was dying, and Matthias knew it. Through the bond she felt his horror. She felt his realization that the ritual had failed. She felt his absolute certainty that he had destroyed the one person he loved. But Lena did not stop speaking. She continued the ritual, her voice growing stronger even as her body grew weaker. And as she spoke the final words, something miraculous happened. The curse did not consume her. It transformed her, the dark serpent that had been slowly killing. Matthias for 300 years was absorbed into her emptiness and neutralized. It did not disappear. It did not vanish. It simply ceased to exist as a force of destruction. It became inert, powerless, dead. And in that moment, Lena understood the true nature of her gift. She was not empty. She was a void that could consume anything. She was a darkness that could neutralize any light. She was a force of absolute negation that could stand against the most powerful magic in the world and remain completely unchanged. She was the most powerful being in Dusk Hollow, and Matthias knew it. He fell to his knees as the curse left his body. The weight of 300 years of slow death lifted from him, and for the first time in centuries, he felt truly alive. He looked up at Lena, and in his eyes, she saw something she had never seen before. Fear, not fear of her power. Fear of what she had become. Fear of the fact that he had created a being more powerful than himself. Fear of the fact that he was no longer the master. He was the servant. "What have I done?" he whispered. Lena looked down at him, and she smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who had finally understood its own nature. "You have created your own destruction," she said, her voice no longer soft and uncertain, but cold and cutting like a scalpel. "You have given me the power to destroy you. And now, Matthias, you will spend the rest of your immortal life wondering if I will use it." The ritual chamber fell silent. The candles flickered and died one by one, as if the darkness itself was consuming the light. Matthias remained on his knees, his body trembling, his eyes fixed on Lena with an expression that was no longer hunger or obsession, but pure, unadulterated terror. The other vampires who lined the walls began to back away slowly, their ancient instinct screaming at them to flee from the presence of something far more dangerous than they had ever encountered. Katerina's face had gone completely white, her red eyes dimming as she realized that the hierarchy of power in Dusk Hollow had just been inverted in a single moment. Lena descended from the altar with movements that were no longer human. Each step was precise, calculated, predatory. The curse that had been transferred into her body had not destroyed her. It had merged with her emptiness and created something entirely new, something that had never existed before, a void that could consume magic itself. "You wanted me to save you," Lena said, her voice echoing through the chamber with a resonance that made the stone walls vibrate. "You wanted me to break the curse and restore your immortality. You wanted me to be your salvation." She stopped directly in front of Matthias, and he looked up at her with eyes that no longer held any trace of the vampire supreme. He was just a man now, just a being who had lived too long and loved too desperately. "But you never asked me what I wanted," Lena continued. "You never asked if I wanted to be saved. You never asked if I wanted to be transformed. You never asked if I wanted to be bound to you for eternity." "Lena," Matthias whispered, his voice breaking, "I did what I thought was necessary. I did what I believed would save us both." "You did what you believed would save yourself," Lena corrected, her voice cutting through his words like a blade. "And in doing so, you have given me the power to destroy you completely. The curse is gone, Matthias. Your immortality is restored. But now you are bound to me in a way that transcends blood and magic. You are bound to me through fear, through the absolute certainty that I could end your existence at any moment, and there is nothing you could do to stop me." She reached down and touched his face, her fingers cold against his skin, and through the bond between them she sent him a vision of what she could do. She showed him the ways she could destroy him. She showed him the slow, agonizing deaths she could inflict. She showed him centuries of suffering that would make the curse seem like a mercy. Matius screamed. It was not a scream of pain, but a scream of absolute despair. The sound echoed through the mansion, through the village, through the frozen forests beyond. Every vampire in Dusk Hollow heard it and understood what it meant. The vampire supreme had fallen. The hierarchy had been shattered. The world had changed. When Matthias's scream finally faded, Lena released him and stepped back. She looked at the other vampires who were still frozen in shock along the walls of the chamber. "Leave," she commanded, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "All of you, return to your quarters. Speak of this to no one. And if any of you ever question my authority again, I will show you what I showed him." The vampires fled without hesitation, their centuries of power and pride stripped away in an instant. Only Katerina remained, her body rigid with shock, her red eyes wide with understanding. "You," Lena said, turning to face the pale woman, "you have served Matthias for how long?" 237 years, Katerina whispered. "Then you will serve me now," Lena said, "and you will do so with the same loyalty and efficiency you have shown him. Do you understand?" "Yes," Katerina said, and she bowed deeply, her centuries of pride crumbling in the face of Lena's absolute power. Lena turned back to Matthias, who was still on his knees, his body shaking with sobs. She felt no pity for him. She felt no compassion. She felt only the cold clarity of someone who had finally understood their own nature. "You asked me to choose between love and power," Lena said quietly. "You asked me to sacrifice my emptiness to save you. But you never understood that emptiness is power. You never understood that the void is the most dangerous force in the universe because it cannot be controlled, cannot be manipulated, cannot be consumed." She walked toward the exit of the ritual chamber, her footsteps echoing against the stone. At the doorway she paused and looked back at Matthias one final time. "You wanted to create a vampire," she said, "but what you actually created was something far more dangerous. You created a being who is no longer bound by the rules of your world. You created a being who can stand in the presence of the most powerful magic and remain completely unchanged. You created your own destruction, Matthias, and now you will spend the rest of your immortal life knowing that you did it to yourself." She left the ritual chamber and climbed the stone stairs back to the mansion above. Behind her, she could hear Matthias's sobs echoing through the darkness. She could feel his despair through the bond that connected them. She could sense his absolute certainty that he had made the greatest mistake of his 347-year existence. And she felt nothing. The mansion was different now. The servants who had once moved through its corridors with fear and deference now moved with uncertainty, unsure of who held the true power. The vampires who had once bowed to Matthias now whispered in corners, trying to understand what had happened in the ritual chamber. Lena walked through the halls like she owned them, because now, in every way that mattered, she did. She found herself in the library, standing before the Book of Binding. She opened it to the page with the blood-red ribbon and read the curse one final time. "By the blood of the innocent, I bind you to slow death. By the power of the earth, I curse your immortality. By the will of the witch, I condemn you to oblivion. And only the empty one can break this chain, but only if she chooses love over power, sacrifice over survival, and death over eternity." Lena understood now what the curse had truly meant. It had not been about Matthias at all. It had been about her. It had been a prophecy written 300 years ago by a witch who had seen into the future and understood what would come to pass. The empty one would break the chain, but not through love, not through sacrifice, not through choosing death over eternity. She would break it through the absolute negation of all those things. She would break it by choosing power over love, survival over sacrifice, and eternity over death. She would break it by becoming something that transcended the very concepts of good and evil, love and hate, life and death. She would break it by becoming the void itself. A knock on the library door interrupted her thoughts. Katerina entered, her pale face composed but her red eyes still reflecting shock. "The Colonel requests your presence in his study," Katerina said carefully, as if speaking to something that might shatter at any moment. "Tell him I will come when I choose to come," Lena replied, not looking up from the book of binding. "And tell him that he no longer has the authority to request anything from me. He may only ask, and I may only refuse." Katerina bowed and left without another word. Lena closed the book of binding and walked to the window. Outside, the blizzard was still raging. Snow falling in sheets so thick that the world beyond the glass had disappeared completely. The village of Dusk Hollow was hidden beneath layers of white, invisible, and isolated from the rest of the world. And somewhere in that village the humans who had rejected her, who had called her empty, who had treated her as if she was worthless, were going about their lives completely unaware that the balance of power had shifted, completely unaware that the girl they had cast out had become the most powerful being in their world. Lena pressed her hand against the cold glass of the window and smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had finally understood the true nature of power. Power was not about controlling others. Power was about being free from the need to control anything at all, and she was finally completely, absolutely free. But as she stood at the window watching the snowfall, she felt something shift inside her, a crack in the void, a moment of doubt, a whisper of something that might have been humanity trying to claw its way back into her consciousness. She had won. She had defeated Matthias. She had become the most powerful being in Dusk Hollow. But at what cost? What had she sacrificed to achieve this power? What part of herself had she lost in the transformation? And most importantly, now that she had the power to do anything, what would she choose to do? The question hung in the air like the snow outside the window, waiting for an answer that Lena was not yet ready to give. The reckoning, 3 days passed in silence. Matthias did not leave his study. He did not feed. He did not speak to anyone. The bond between him and Lena remained open, a constant channel through which she could feel his despair, his regret, his absolute certainty that he had destroyed the only thing that had ever mattered to him. And Lena felt nothing. She moved through the mansion like its true owner, issuing commands that were obeyed without question. She reorganized the hierarchy of power, elevating the vampires who showed her respect and isolating those who harbored resentment. She opened the transformation chamber and released the chained man, watching as he stumbled into the sunlight for the first time in 3 years, his body too weak to do anything but collapse in the snow. Katerina followed her everywhere, her pale face a mask of perfect obedience. But Lena could feel the question burning in the vampire's mind, the same question that was burning in the minds of every vampire in Dusk Hollow. What would the new Vampire Supreme do with her power? On the 4th day, Lena decided to visit the village. She dressed in a black coat that seemed to absorb the light around her, and she rode a horse through the frozen forest toward Dusk Hollow. The snow crunched beneath the horse's hooves, and the wind howled through the bare trees like a chorus of the damned. When she arrived at the village, the humans scattered like insects, pressing themselves against the walls of their homes, their eyes wide with terror, because they could feel it. They could feel the shift in power. They could sense that something had changed in the hierarchy of their world. Lena rode directly to the chapel, where the chapel keeper was performing the evening prayers. She dismounted from her horse and walked through the doors, her footsteps echoing against the stone floor. The chapel keeper looked up, and his face went white. "You," he whispered, recognizing her immediately. "The empty one, not empty anymore," Lena said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I have come to tell you something, Keepa. I have come to tell you that the girl you rejected, the girl you called worthless, the girl you marked as void of all power, has become the most powerful being in this village." The chapel keeper tried to stand, but his legs would not obey. He remained on his knees, his body trembling. "For 19 years I was invisible," Lena continued, walking slowly toward him. "For 19 years I was treated as if I did not exist. For 19 years I was made to believe that I was nothing. And you, Keeper, you were the one who made that decision. You were the one who looked at my blood and declared it empty. You were the one who set in motion the chain of events that led to my transformation." She stopped directly in front of him, and she reached down and touched his face with one cold finger. "Do you know what I could do to you right now?" she asked softly. "Do you know the ways I could make you suffer? Do you know the centuries of pain I could inflict on your body while keeping you alive to experience every moment of it?" The chapel keeper whimpered, his entire body shaking with terror. "But I will not," Lena said, and she withdrew her hand. "Because you are not worth the effort. You are not worth the energy. You are simply a small, frightened man who made a decision based on fear and ignorance, and that is punishment enough." She turned and walked back toward the door, but before she left, she paused and looked back at the chapel keeper one final time. "However," she said, "I want you to understand something. The ritual of naming that you perform every winter, the ritual that has determined the fate of every child in this village for centuries, is over. There will be no more testing of blood. There will be no more declarations of emptiness or power, because I have decided that every child in this village, regardless of their gifts or lack thereof, deserves the right to determine their own fate." She left the chapel and rode back toward the mansion, leaving the chapel keeper on his knees, his entire world view shattered. When she arrived back at the mansion, Katerina was waiting for her in the entrance hall. "The Coronel requests your presence," Katerina said carefully. "He says it is urgent." Lena climbed the stairs to Mateus's study without responding. She found him standing by the window, looking out at the frozen landscape. He had not fed in 4 days, and his body was beginning to show the strain. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes had lost some of their darkness. "You went to the village," he said without turning around. "Yes," Lena confirmed. "You told the chapel keeper that the ritual of naming was over." "Yes." Mateus turned to face her, and she saw something in his expression that she had not expected. Not anger, not resentment, but understanding. "You're going to change everything," he said quietly. "You're going to transform this world in ways that I never could. You're going to take the power that I have wielded for 300 years and use it to create something entirely new." "Yes," Lena said. "And you will do it without me," Mateus continued. "You will do it as if I do not exist. You will rule this village, this realm, this world, and I will be nothing but a ghost haunting the corridors of my own mansion." Lena did not respond. She simply looked at him with eyes that were no longer human, eyes that reflected nothing but the absolute void of her power. "I deserve this," Mateus said, and his voice broke slightly. "I deserve to be erased. I deserve to be forgotten. I deserve to spend the rest of my immortal life knowing that I created the being who destroyed me." He walked to his desk and opened a drawer. Inside was a silver dagger, ancient and ornate, with symbols carved into its blade that matched the ones on the silver object he had given Lena so long ago. "This is the dagger of unbinding," Mateus said, holding it up to the light. "It is the only weapon that can kill a vampire. It is the only thing in this world that can end my existence permanently. I am offering it to you." He placed the dagger on the desk between them. "You can end this," he continued. "You can end me. You can erase the Vampire Supreme from existence and rule alone, without the burden of my presence, without the weight of my history, without the constant reminder of what you had to sacrifice to achieve your power." Lena looked at the dagger. She could feel the power radiating from it, the ancient magic that had been infused into its blade centuries ago. She could feel the way it called to her, the way it promised an end to the bond between her and Matius, the way it offered her complete and absolute freedom. All she had to do was pick it up. All she had to do was drive it through his heart. All she had to do was end him. And she realized in that moment that she could not do it, not because she loved him, not because she felt compassion for him, not because she believed he deserved to live, but because killing him would mean accepting the role he had created for her. It would mean becoming the predator, the destroyer, the monster that he had always been. It would mean allowing him to define her, even in death. And Lena had spent too long being defined by others. She reached out and picked up the dagger. Matthias's breath caught, and through the bond between them she felt a spike of hope. He thought she was going to kill him. He thought she was going to end his suffering. But instead she held the dagger out to him. "If you want to end your existence," she said coldly, "you are welcome to do so, but you will do it yourself. You will not use me as your instrument of death. You will not make me the one who destroys you, because that would give you power over me, and I will never allow that again." She placed the dagger in his hands and turned to leave. "Lena," Matthias called out, his voice desperate, "please. I cannot live like this. I cannot exist knowing that I have lost you. I cannot bear the weight of what I have done." Lena paused at the door and looked back at him one final time. "Then you will learn to bear it," she said, "because that is your punishment. Not death, not destruction, but life. Eternal, endless life, knowing that you created the being who surpassed you, knowing that you are no longer the master of your own world, knowing that you will spend the rest of your immortal existence in the shadow of someone you tried to control." She left the study and closed the door behind her, leaving Matthias alone with the dagger of unbinding and the terrible knowledge that he would never have the courage to use it. That night Lena stood in the library looking at the book of binding one final time. She understood now what the curse had truly been about. It had not been a punishment for Matthias. It had been a test to see if he would choose love or power, a test to see if he would be willing to sacrifice everything for the one person he claimed to care about, and he had failed. He had chosen survival over love. He had chosen power over sacrifice. He had chosen to manipulate and control rather than to trust and release. And in doing so, he had created his own destruction. Lena closed the book of binding and placed it back on the shelf. She walked to the window and looked out at the frozen landscape beyond. The village of Dusk Hollow was sleeping, unaware that its entire world had been transformed. The humans were unaware that their fate was no longer determined by the ritual of naming. The vampires were unaware that a new order had been established, one based not on power and control, but on something far more dangerous, on absolute freedom. And as Lena stood at the window, watching the snow fall, she felt the last remnants of her humanity slip away. She was no longer Lena Volkov, the empty girl from the village. She was no longer the servant, the invisible one, the girl who had been rejected and cast out. She was the void. She was the negation. She was the force that could stand against the most powerful magic in the world and remain completely unchanged. She was the new Vampire Supreme, and the world would never be the same. The void expands. 6 months had passed since the winter solstice. The mansion had transformed into something entirely different under Lena's rule. The servants moved with purpose now, no longer driven by fear, but by a sense of order that was somehow more terrifying than chaos. The vampires had reorganized themselves into a new hierarchy, one based not on age or power, but on loyalty to the new Vampire Supreme. Matthias still lived in the mansion. He occupied his study during the day and wandered the corridors at night like a ghost haunting his own home. He did not feed regularly. He did not interact with the other vampires. He simply existed, a shadow of what he had once been, a living monument to the consequences of hubris. Lena had not killed him. She had not needed to. The dagger of unbinding remained on his desk, untouched, Every night, Matthias would stare at it, his hand trembling as he considered ending his existence. And every night, he would pull his hand away, unable to find the courage to use it. The bond between them remained open, a constant channel through which Lena could feel his despair, his regret, his absolute certainty that death would be a mercy compared to the existence he now endured. But Lena had other concerns now. The village of Dusk Hollow had begun to change. Without the ritual of naming, the humans had started to question the hierarchy that had governed their lives for centuries. They had begun to wonder if the gifts they possessed were truly gifts, or if they were simply chains designed to keep them in servitude to the vampires. They had begun to organize, to resist, to demand something that had never been demanded before: freedom. Lena stood in the library reading reports from Katerina about the growing unrest in the village. The humans were gathering in secret. They were planning something. They were preparing for a confrontation that would change everything. And Lena found herself in an unexpected position. She could crush them. She could descend on the village with the full force of her power and obliterate every human who dared to resist. She could make an example of them that would echo through the centuries, warning to anyone who might consider defying the Vampire Supreme. But something inside her, some remnant of the girl who had been invisible, who had been rejected, who had been treated as if she did not exist, made her hesitate. A knock on the library door interrupted her thoughts. Katerina entered, her pale face composed but her red eyes reflecting concern. "The humans are gathering in the chapel," Katerina reported. "They have elected a leader, a man named Thomas. He was a farmer before the ritual of naming marked him as having earth sense. He is organizing a rebellion. Bring him to me," Lena commanded. An hour later, Thomas stood in the library, his body rigid with defiance, his eyes burning with the kind of courage that only comes from having nothing left to lose. He was middle-aged, with calloused hands and a face weathered by years of working the frozen fields. He looked at Lena with an expression that was not fear, but something far more dangerous: pity. "You are the one they call the empty girl," Thomas said, his voice steady. "The one who was rejected by the village. The one who became the Vampire Supreme." "Yes," Lena confirmed. "Then you should understand what we are fighting for," Thomas continued. "You should understand what it means to be rejected, to be cast out, to be treated as if you do not exist. We are fighting for the right to determine our own fate. We are fighting for the right to live without the constant threat of being consumed by creatures who see us as nothing more than food." Lena felt something shift inside her, a crack in the void, a moment of recognition. This man was right. He was absolutely right. And she had become the very thing she had hated most. She had become a predator. "What do you want?" Lena asked quietly. "We want independence," Thomas said. "We want the right to govern ourselves. We want the vampires to leave Dusk Hollow and never return. We want to be free." Lena walked to the window and looked out at the frozen village below. She could see the humans gathering in the streets, could feel their determination, could sense their absolute conviction that they were fighting for something worth dying for. And she understood in that moment that she had a choice to make. She could maintain the status quo. She could keep the vampires in power, keep the humans in servitude, keep the world exactly as it had been for centuries. She could be the Vampire Supreme, ruling with absolute authority, feared and obeyed by all. Or she could do something far more radical. She could choose to be free. "You will have your independence," Lena said, turning back to face Thomas. "The vampires will withdraw from Dusk Hollow. We will establish a boundary, a line that neither humans nor vampires will cross. You will govern yourselves, and we will govern ourselves, and the two worlds will exist in separate peace." Thomas's face went white. "You would do this? You would give up your power?" "I am not giving up my power," Lena said coldly. "I am choosing how to use it. And I choose to use it to create something that has never existed before. A world where humans and vampires coexist without one dominating the other." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. But understand this, Thomas. If any human ever violates the boundary, if any human ever attempts to harm a vampire, if any human ever tries to take what is not theirs, I will respond with absolute force. The peace I am offering you is not weakness. It is a choice. And choices have consequences. Thomas nodded slowly, understanding the implicit threat beneath her words. We accept your terms, he said. Over the next 3 months the transition was completed. The vampires withdrew from Dusk Hollow, establishing themselves in the mansion and the surrounding forests. The humans took control of the village, establishing their own government, their own laws, their own way of life. The boundary was marked with ancient stones, symbols carved into their surface warning both humans and vampires not to cross, and for the first time in centuries, there was peace. But it was a fragile peace, built on the understanding that it could be shattered at any moment. And Lena knew that maintaining it would require constant vigilance, constant sacrifice, constant reminders of what would happen if either side attempted to violate the agreement. One night Lena found Matius standing at the boundary looking out at the village below. He was thinner now, his body beginning to show the signs of starvation. Without the constant supply of human blood from the village, the vampires had been forced to hunt in the forests, to sustain themselves on the blood of animals, to accept a diminished existence. You have destroyed everything, Matius said quietly, not turning to face her. You have taken the world I built and torn it apart. I have freed it, Lena corrected. I have taken the world you've built on slavery and transformed it into something better. Better? Matius laughed, a sound like wind through a graveyard. You have condemned the vampires to slow starvation. You have given the humans the illusion of freedom while keeping them imprisoned by fear. You have created a world that is balanced on a knife's edge, one that will collapse the moment someone makes a mistake. Yes, Lena said, that is exactly what I have done, and it is far better than the world you created. Matius finally turned to face her, and she saw something in his expression that she had not expected. Not anger, not resentment, but understanding. You have become what I could never be, he said quietly. You have become someone who is willing to sacrifice everything for something greater than yourself. You have become a true leader. He reached into his coat and pulled out the dagger of unbinding. He held it up to the moonlight, and the ancient blade gleamed with a cold, terrible beauty. I am going to end this now, Matius said. I am going to release you from the burden of my existence. I am going to give you the gift of absolute freedom. No, Lena said, and she reached out and took the dagger from his hands. You will not take that choice away from me. You will not use your death as a way to control me, to define me, to make me responsible for your fate. You will live, Matius. You will live with the knowledge of what you have done. You will live with the understanding that you created the being who surpassed you. You will live with the absolute certainty that you will never be forgiven. She threw the dagger of unbinding into the frozen forest, and it disappeared into the darkness, lost forever. That is your punishment, Lena said. Not death, not destruction, but life. Eternal, endless life, knowing that you are no longer the master of your own world, knowing that you are no longer necessary, knowing that the being you created has moved beyond you in every way that matters. Matius fell to his knees in the snow, his body racked with sobs, and Lena felt nothing. She simply turned and walked back toward the mansion, leaving him alone at the boundary between two worlds. Behind her, she could hear his cries echoing through the frozen forest, could feel his despair through the bond that connected them, could sense his absolute certainty that he had made the greatest mistake of his existence. And she felt nothing at all, because Lena had finally understood the true nature of power. It was not about controlling others. It was not about dominating the world. It was about being free from the need to care about anything at all. She was the void. She was the negation. She was the force that could stand against the most powerful magic in the world and remain completely unchanged. And she would rule her world with absolute indifference. creating order not out of love, but out of the cold, calculated understanding that chaos was simply another form of weakness. The new Vampire Supreme had arrived, and the world would never be the same. The inversion of power, the mansion had become a tomb. Matthias moved through its corridors like a ghost, his footsteps echoing against stone walls that no longer recognized him as their master. The servants avoided his gaze. The vampires who had once bowed to him now looked through him as if he did not exist. He had become invisible in his own home, a living monument to the consequences of his own ambition. Lena ruled from the library now. It had become her throne room, though she would never call it that. She sat at the mahogany desk where she had first read the journals of her bloodline, and from there she issued commands that shaped the fate of two worlds. The vampires came to her with disputes. The humans sent emissaries to negotiate the boundaries, and she listened to them all with the cold, calculated indifference of someone who had transcended the need for emotion. 6 months after the establishment of the boundary, Matthias attempted to feed from one of the remaining servants. It was a violation of Lena's new law, a law that stated all feeding must be consensual, all blood must be given willingly, all predation must be controlled and measured. The servant, a young woman named Clara, had refused him, and Matthias, driven by hunger and desperation, had tried to take what was not offered. Lena found him in the servants' quarters, his fangs extended, his eyes glowing red with the hunger of 300 years. Clara was on the ground, her neck bleeding, her body trembling with terror and pain. Lena did not speak. She simply walked into the room, and the temperature dropped so dramatically that frost began to form on the walls. Matthias felt the shift in power immediately. He released Clara and stepped back, his body instinctively recognizing the presence of something far more dangerous than himself. "You have violated the law," Lena said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You have attempted to take blood without consent. You have proven that you cannot be trusted to govern yourself." "Lena, I was hungry," Matthias pleaded, his voice breaking. "I have not fed properly in months. The animals in the forest are not enough. I am dying." "Then you will die," Lena said coldly, "because I will not allow you to prey on those who cannot defend themselves. You will learn to sustain yourself on what is available, or you will fade into oblivion. Those are your only choices." She turned to Clara, who was still trembling on the ground. "You are released from service," Lena commanded. "You will go to the village. You will tell them what happened here. You will tell them that the Vampire Supreme protects those who cannot protect themselves. You will tell them that the age of predation is over." Clara scrambled to her feet and fled the room, leaving a trail of blood on the stone floor. Lena turned back to Matthias, and he saw something in her eyes that terrified him more than anything else. Not anger, not hatred, but absolute, complete indifference. "You are no longer welcome in this mansion," she said. "You will leave at dawn. You will take only what you can carry. You will go into the forest, and you will learn to survive on your own, the way the humans have learned to survive. You will experience what it means to have nothing. You will experience what it means to be invisible." "Where will I go?" Matthias whispered. "I do not care," Lena replied. "That is no longer my concern. You created me to save yourself. You bound me to you through blood and magic. And now you will spend the rest of your immortal life knowing that the being you created has abandoned you to the same fate you inflicted on others." She left the room, leaving Matthias alone in the darkness. At dawn, Matthias stood at the gates of the mansion with nothing but the clothes on his back and a single silver coin, a memento of his former power. He looked back at the mansion one final time, at the stone walls that had been his home for 300 years. At the windows that had looked out on a world he had ruled with absolute authority. And then he turned and walked into the frozen forest, disappearing into the darkness like a ghost fading into memory. Lena watched from the library window as he left. She could feel him through the bond that connected them, could sense his despair, could feel the moment when he accepted that he would never return, and she felt nothing, no satisfaction, no regret, no emotion at all. She had become what she had always feared most. She had become a predator. She had become a monster. She had become the very thing that had rejected her, cast her out, made her invisible. But unlike Matthias, she did not deny what she was. She accepted it. She embraced it. She used it to create order in a world that had known only chaos. The weeks that followed were transformative. With Matthias gone, Lena was able to consolidate her power completely. She established new laws. She created a council of vampires who would help her govern. She opened the transformation chamber and released all the prisoners who had been held there, allowing them to choose whether to remain in service or to leave and seek their own fate. Some chose to stay. Some chose to leave, and Lena did not judge either choice. She also began to change the relationship between vampires and humans. She established a system of voluntary blood donation where humans could offer their blood in exchange for protection and resources. It was not slavery. It was not predation. It was a transaction, a choice, a mutual agreement between two species that had learned to coexist. The humans in Dusk Hollow were skeptical at first, but as weeks turned into months, they began to understand that Lena's rule was different from Matthias's rule. She did not demand. She did not threaten. She simply established boundaries and enforced them with absolute precision. One night, Thomas came to the mansion to meet with Lena. He was no longer the defiant rebel who had demanded independence. He was now the elected leader of Dusk Hollow, a man who had learned to govern his people with wisdom and compassion. "The village is prospering," Thomas reported, sitting across from Lena in the library. "The humans are no longer living in fear. They are building new homes. They are establishing trade routes. They are creating a future for themselves." "Good," Lena said, not looking up from the documents she was reviewing. "But there is something else," Thomas continued. "The humans want to know about you. They want to understand who you are. They want to know if you are truly different from Matthias, or if you are simply a more sophisticated predator." Lena finally looked up from her documents, and Thomas saw something in her eyes that made him understand the truth. She was not human. She was not vampire. She was something entirely new, something that transcended the categories that had defined the world for centuries. "Tell them the truth," Lena said quietly. "Tell them that I am neither savior nor monster. Tell them that I am simply someone who has learned to use power without being consumed by it. Tell them that I will protect them as long as they respect the boundaries I have established. And tell them that if they ever violate those boundaries, I will respond with absolute force." Thomas nodded, understanding the implicit threat beneath her words. "There is one more thing," he said carefully. "The humans have been asking about Matthias. They want to know what happened to him. They want to know if he is truly gone." "He is gone," Lena confirmed. "He left the mansion 3 months ago. Where he is now, I do not know, and I do not care. He is no longer my concern." But that was not entirely true. Through the bond that connected them, Lena could feel Matthias's presence in the frozen forest. She could sense his desperation, his hunger, his slow descent into madness. She could feel him dying, not from the curse, but from the weight of his own emptiness. And she felt nothing. That night Lena stood at the boundary between the vampire realm and the human realm, looking out at the frozen landscape. The snow was falling again, covering everything in a blanket of white, erasing the past, creating the possibility of a new future. She thought about the girl she had been, the empty girl from the village. The girl who had been rejected, cast out, made invisible. That girl was gone now. She had been consumed by the void, transformed into something entirely new. And Lena understood, finally, that this was the true nature of power. It was not about controlling others. It was not about dominating the world. It was about transcending the need for any of those things. It was about becoming so complete in your own emptiness that nothing external could ever touch you again. She was the void. She was the negation. She was the force that could stand against the most powerful magic in the world and remain completely unchanged. And she would rule her world with absolute indifference, creating order, not out of love, but out of the cold, calculated understanding that chaos was simply another form of weakness. The new Vampire Supreme had arrived, and the world would never be the same. But as she stood at the boundary, watching the snowfall, Lena felt something shift inside her. A crack in the void, a moment of doubt, a whisper of something that might have been humanity trying to claw its way back into her consciousness. She had won. She had defeated Matthias. She had become the most powerful being in her world. But at what cost? What had she sacrificed to achieve this power? What part of herself had she lost in the transformation? And most importantly, now that she had the power to do anything, what would she choose to do? The question hung in the air like the snow falling from the sky, waiting for an answer that Lena was not yet ready to give. The ghost in the forest. 6 months had passed since Matthias disappeared into the frozen forest. 6 months of silence. 6 months of absence. And yet, through the bond that connected them, Lena could feel him. She could sense his presence like a wound that would not close, like a ghost that refused to fade into memory. He was dying. Not from hunger, though hunger was consuming him. Not from the cold, though the winter was relentless. But from something far more devastating. He was dying from the knowledge that he had created the being who had destroyed him. He was dying from the absolute certainty that he would never be forgiven. He was dying from the weight of his own emptiness. Lena felt none of this. She simply acknowledged it as one might acknowledge a fact of nature. The sun rises, the snow falls, Matthias suffers in the forest. It was neither good nor bad, it simply was. The mansion had transformed completely under her rule. The transformation chamber had been converted into a library. The dungeons had been sealed. The servants who remained had chosen to stay, understanding that Lena's rule, while cold and precise, was far more just than Matthias's had ever been. They were paid fairly. They were treated with respect. They were allowed to leave whenever they wished. None of them left. Katerina had become Lena's closest advisor, though the word close was misleading. There was no warmth between them, no genuine affection, but there was respect, there was understanding. There was the recognition that they were both creatures of necessity, both survivors of a world that demanded absolute precision and unwavering loyalty. One night, as Lena was reviewing the accounts of the blood donation program, Katerina entered the library with an expression that was unusual for her. Concern. "There is someone at the boundary," Katerina said quietly. "A human. She is asking to speak with you." Lena set down her documents and looked up. "Who is she?" "She will not give her name," Katerina replied. "But she says she has information about the coronel. She says she knows where he is." Lena felt something shift inside her, not emotion, not curiosity, but a recognition that this moment was significant, that something was about to change. "Bring her to the library," Lena commanded. The woman who entered was young, perhaps 25, with dark hair and eyes that held a depth of pain that Lena recognized immediately. She had suffered. She had lost something precious. She had been broken and was still learning how to exist in the pieces of herself that remained. "My name is Elena," the woman said, her voice trembling slightly. "I am the daughter of Matthias. I am the daughter of the Vampire Supreme." The library fell silent. Lena felt the bond between her and Matthias pulse with sudden intensity. She could feel his shock through the connection. She could feel his absolute certainty that this was impossible. "That is not possible," Lena said coldly. "Matthias has no children. He has no family. He has only himself. He has me," Elena said, and she stepped forward into the light. As she did, Lena saw it. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same dark eyes, the same sharp features, the same presence that seemed to absorb the light around her. "My mother was a vampire," Elena continued. "Her name was Isabelle Moreau. She was the witch who placed the curse on Matthias 300 years ago. But before she cursed him, she loved him. And when she discovered what he had done to her, when she realized that he had taken everything from her, she did not simply curse him. She cursed him with the knowledge that he would one day meet his daughter, and that daughter would be the instrument of his destruction. Lena listened without speaking. Through the bond, she could feel Matthias's memories flooding into her consciousness. She could see the moment he had met Isabel. She could see the moment he had fallen in love with her. She could see the moment he had betrayed her, taking something precious from her and destroying it without a second thought. And she could see the moment Isabel had discovered what he had done, the moment she had placed the curse, the moment she had hidden her daughter away, knowing that one day the daughter would find her father and make him pay for his sins. Isabel died 300 years ago, Elena continued. But before she died, she made sure that I would be born. She made sure that I would be hidden among the humans, raised without knowledge of my true nature. She made sure that I would one day discover the truth and seek out my father. And now you have found him, Lena said quietly. What do you intend to do? I intend to finish what my mother started, Elena said, and her eyes began to glow red. I intend to make him suffer the way he made her suffer. I intend to make him understand what it means to lose everything. Lena felt something shift inside her. A crack in the void, a moment of recognition. This woman was not so different from herself. She was the product of a curse. She was the instrument of vengeance. She was the embodiment of a mother's rage transformed into a daughter's purpose. He is in the forest, Lena said, and she stood up from her desk. He has been there for 6 months, slowly dying, slowly going mad. He is no longer the vampire supreme. He is simply a ghost, haunting the place where he once ruled. Then I will find him, Elena said, turning to leave. Wait, Lena commanded, and Elena stopped. I will take you to him, because I want to see what happens when a daughter finally confronts the father who destroyed her mother. I want to see if vengeance is truly as satisfying as everyone claims it to be. They rode through the frozen forest on horseback, Lena and Elena and Katerina, moving through the darkness like ghosts themselves. The snow crunched beneath the horses' hooves, and the wind howled through the bare trees like a chorus of the damned. And then they found him. Matthias was huddled beneath a massive oak tree, his body emaciated, his eyes hollow and mad. He had not fed in months. He had not spoken to another living being in half a year. He had simply sat beneath the tree, waiting for death to come, waiting for the suffering to end. When he saw Elena, he understood immediately. Through the bond that connected him to Lena, he felt her memories. He felt the truth of her existence. He felt the knowledge that his past had finally caught up with him. Isabel, he whispered, his voice like wind through a graveyard. No, Elena said coldly. I am not Isabel. I am her daughter. I am the curse made flesh. I am the vengeance that has been waiting 300 years to be unleashed. She extended her hand, and Matthias saw the silver dagger in her grip, the dagger of unbinding, the weapon that could end his existence permanently. My mother cursed you to slow death, Elena said, but I am going to give you a mercy. I am going to end your suffering. I am going to release you from the burden of your own existence. Matthias looked at the dagger, and then he looked at Lena. Through the bond, he sent her a final message, a final plea, a final moment of connection before the end. And Lena felt nothing. Elena drove the dagger of unbinding through Matthias's heart, and the vampire supreme, the being who had ruled for 347 years, who had created empires and destroyed kingdoms, who had loved and lost and destroyed everything he touched, simply ceased to exist. His body crumbled to dust, scattered by the wind, absorbed into the frozen earth. And the bond that had connected him to Lena snapped like a broken string, leaving her suddenly, shockingly, alone in her own mind for the first time in months. She felt the absence like a physical wound, and in that moment Lena understood something that she had been avoiding for months. She had loved him, not the way a woman loves a man, not the way a servant loves a master, but the way a creature loves the force that created it. The way a being loves the one who gave it existence, even if that existence was born from manipulation and control. And now he was gone. Elena stood over the dust that had once been Matthias, her body trembling with the intensity of her emotions. She had waited 300 years for this moment. She had been born for this purpose. And now that it was complete, she did not know what to do with herself. "It is done," she said quietly, her voice hollow. "Yes," Lena confirmed. "It is done." They rode back to the mansion in silence. Elena was taken to a guest room, given food and shelter, offered the choice to stay or leave. She chose to stay, understanding that she and Lena were bound by something far deeper than blood or magic. They were bound by the knowledge that they were both instruments of vengeance, both products of curses, both creatures who had been created for a specific purpose and had transcended that purpose to become something entirely new. That night, Lena stood in the library looking at the Book of Binding one final time. She opened it to the page with the blood-red ribbon and read the curse one more time. "By the blood of the innocent, I bind you to slow death. By the power of the earth, I curse your immortality. By the will of the witch, I condemn you to oblivion. And only the empty one can break this chain, but only if she chooses love over power, sacrifice over survival, and death over eternity." Lena understood now what the curse had truly meant. It had not been about Matthias at all. It had been about her. It had been a prophecy written 300 years ago by a witch, who had seen into the future and understood what would come to pass. The empty one would break the chain, but not through love, not through sacrifice, not through choosing death over eternity. She would break it by choosing to love the one who had destroyed her. She would break it by sacrificing her own emptiness to save him. She would break it by choosing to live, even knowing that living meant carrying the weight of his memory forever. And in doing so, she would become something far more powerful than any vampire, any witch, any force of magic that had ever existed. She would become human. Lena closed the Book of Binding and placed it back on the shelf. She walked to the window and looked out at the frozen landscape beyond. The village of Dusk Hollow was sleeping, unaware that the Vampire Supreme had finally fallen. The humans were unaware that the curse had been broken. The vampires were unaware that everything had changed. And Lena stood alone in the darkness, feeling the weight of 300 years of history pressing down on her shoulders, understanding finally that power was not about controlling others. Power was about accepting the consequences of your own choices, and she had chosen to love a monster, and that choice had destroyed him. When the void becomes everything, 1 year had passed since Matthias fell to dust beneath the frozen oak tree. 1 year of silence, 1 year of absence. 1 year of Lena learning what it meant to exist in a world where the bond that had defined her existence no longer pulsed through her veins. The mansion had transformed into something entirely different. It was no longer a seat of power built on fear and predation. It had become a sanctuary, a place where vampires and humans could coexist without one dominating the other, a place where the old rules had been shattered and new ones were still being written. Elena had remained at the mansion. She had not left. She had not sought revenge against the other vampires who had served Matthias. Instead, she had chosen to stay, to help Lena govern, to build something that neither of them had ever believed possible. A world where the sins of the past could be acknowledged without consuming the future. The blood donation program had expanded. Humans came willingly to the mansion, offering their blood in exchange for protection, resources, and something far more valuable: purpose. The knowledge that their sacrifice meant something, the understanding that they were not prey, but partners in a new world order. Thomas had become the official liaison between the human village and the vampire realm. He came to the mansion once a week to report on the state of Dusk Hollow. The village was thriving. New buildings had been constructed. Trade routes had been established. The humans were no longer living in fear. They were living in hope. But Lena was not at peace. She stood in the library one night, looking at the Book of Binding for what she knew would be the last time. She had read it so many times that she had memorized every word, every symbol, every prophecy written in blood and magic, and she had finally understood what it truly meant. The curse had never been about Medius. It had always been about her. It had always been about the choice she would have to make, the choice between power and humanity, the choice between ruling with absolute indifference and ruling with compassion, the choice between becoming a void that consumed everything and becoming a being that could create something new. And she had chosen wrong. She had chosen power. She had chosen indifference. She had chosen to become the void. And in doing so, she had lost the one thing that had made her human. She had lost the capacity to feel. She had lost the ability to love. She had lost herself. Alina found her in the library, standing motionless before the Book of Binding. "You are suffering," Alina said quietly. It was not a question. "No," Lena replied, "I am incapable of suffering. I am incapable of feeling anything at all." "That is not true," Alina said, and she stepped closer. "I can see it in your eyes. I can feel it through the connection we share. You are dying, Lena, not from hunger, not from the cold, but from the weight of your own emptiness." Lena turned to face her, and Alina saw something in her expression that she had never seen before. Vulnerability, doubt, the crack in the void that had been widening for months. "When I killed Matius," Alina continued, "I thought I would feel satisfaction. I thought I would feel vindication. I thought I would finally be free from the curse that had defined my existence. But I felt nothing. I felt the same emptiness that you feel now. And I realized in that moment that vengeance is not freedom. Vengeance is simply another form of slavery." "What are you saying?" Lena asked. "I'm saying that you need to choose," Alina said. "You need to choose whether you want to continue being the void or whether you want to become human again. You need to choose whether you want to rule with absolute indifference or whether you want to rule with compassion. You need to choose whether you want to be a monster or whether you want to be a leader." Lena felt something shift inside her, a crack in the void, a moment of recognition, a whisper of something that might have been hope. "I do not know how to be human," Lena whispered. "I have spent so long being empty that I have forgotten what it means to feel." "Then you will learn," Alina said, and she extended her hand. "You will learn because you are not alone. You will learn because there are people who depend on you. You will learn because the world you have created demands a leader who is willing to feel, to care, to sacrifice." Lena took Alina's hand, and the moment their skin touched, something shifted in the universe. The bond that had connected her to Matius had been severed when he died, but now a new bond was forming. A bond not based on blood and magic, but on choice, on the decision to care about another being, on the commitment to build something together. And Lena felt it. For the first time in months, she felt something other than emptiness. She felt connection. She felt purpose. She felt the first stirrings of what might have been love. Over the following weeks, Lena began to change. She started to spend time with the humans in the village. She listened to their stories. She learned about their lives, their dreams, their fears. She began to understand that power was not about controlling others, but about serving them, about creating a world where they could thrive. She also began to spend time with Elena, learning about the mother she had never known, learning about Isabel Moreau, the witch who had cursed Medius 300 years ago, learning about the sacrifice that Isabel had made to ensure that her daughter would one day be born, would one day meet her father, would one day have the opportunity to choose a different path than the one her mother had chosen. And slowly, gradually, Lena began to heal. The crack in the void began to widen. The emptiness that had defined her began to fill with something new, something that was not power, but something far more valuable. humanity. One night, as Lena was walking through the mansion, she found herself in Matthias's old study. The dagger of unbinding was no longer on the desk. Alina had taken it and hidden it away, ensuring that no one would ever use it again. But the desk remained, a monument to the man who had ruled for 300 years. Lena sat at the desk and opened the drawer. Inside was a journal written in Matthias's handwriting. She had never seen it before. She opened it carefully and began to read. The journal was a record of his thoughts, his feelings, his absolute certainty that he was doing the right thing by hiding her away. It was a chronicle of his obsession with her, his need to control her, his desperate hope that she would save him from the curse that was slowly consuming him. But it was also something else. It was a record of his love for her. Not the possessive love of a predator for its prey, but something deeper, something that transcended the bond between them and existed on its own. He had loved her, not because she could save him, but because she was her, because she was the one being in the universe who could stand in his presence and remain completely unchanged. Lena read the journal from beginning to end, and when she finished, she wept. For the first time since her transformation, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her emotions. She wept for the girl she had been. She wept for the man Matthias could have been if he had chosen differently. She wept for the mother she had never known. She wept for the world that had been lost and the world that was being built. And in her tears, she felt something shift inside her. The void was not disappearing. It would always be a part of her. It would always be her greatest strength and her greatest weakness, but it was no longer consuming her. It was no longer defining her. It was simply a part of who she was. Elena found her in the study, tears streaming down her face, Matthias's journal open on the desk before her. "He loved you," Elena said quietly, sitting beside her. "Yes," Lena confirmed. "He loved me, and I destroyed him because of it." "No," Elena said, and she took Lena's hand. "You did not destroy him. He destroyed himself. You simply showed him the consequences of his own choices. You simply held up a mirror and forced him to see what he had become." Lena squeezed Elena's hand, and in that moment she understood something that she had been avoiding for months. She had not become a monster. She had become a leader who was willing to make difficult choices, a leader who was willing to sacrifice her own happiness for the good of her people. A leader who had learned that true power was not about controlling others, but about serving them. The winter solstice arrived again, marking 1 year since the ritual that had changed everything. Lena stood at the boundary between the vampire realm and the human realm, looking out at the frozen landscape. The snow was falling again, covering everything in a blanket of white, erasing the past, creating the possibility of a new future. Thomas approached her, his face weathered by the cold, his eyes reflecting the wisdom of a man who had learned to govern his people with compassion. "The village is at peace," Thomas reported. "The humans are thriving. The trade routes are established. The future is secure." "Good," Lena said, and she felt something in her chest that she had not felt in months. Satisfaction. Not the cold, calculated satisfaction of power, but the warm, genuine satisfaction of knowing that she had made a difference, that she had created something good. "There is one more thing," Thomas said carefully. "The humans have been asking about you. They want to know if you will ever visit the village again. They want to know if you will ever walk among them as one of them." Lena considered the question. She could feel the weight of it, the significance of it. The humans were asking her to be more than a ruler. They were asking her to be a leader who was willing to be vulnerable, to be present, to be human. "Tell them yes," Lena said. "Tell them that I will visit the village. Tell them that I will walk among them. Tell them that I am learning what it means to be human again." That night, Lena stood in the library one final time, looking at the Book of Binding. She understood now what the curse had truly meant. It had not been a punishment. It had been a gift. It had been a prophecy written by a mother who loved her daughter so much that she was willing to curse the man she loved to ensure that her daughter would one day be born. Lena closed the book of binding and placed it back on the shelf. She would not destroy it. She would not hide it. She would simply leave it there, a record of the past, a reminder of the choices that had been made, a testament to the power of love and sacrifice. She walked to the window and looked out at the frozen landscape. The village of Dusk Hollow was sleeping, unaware that the Vampire Supreme had finally found peace. The humans were unaware that the curse had been broken. The vampires were unaware that everything had changed. And Lena stood alone in the darkness, feeling the weight of 300 years of history pressing down on her shoulders, understanding finally that power was not about controlling others. Power was about accepting the consequences of your own choices and choosing to build something better. The empty girl from the village had become the Vampire Supreme. But more importantly, she had become human again, and the world would never be the same. But as Lena turned to leave the library, she felt something shift in the bond that connected her to the world around her. A presence, a consciousness, a being that should not exist. She turned back to the window and looked out at the frozen forest. And there, beneath the ancient oak tree where Medius had fallen to dust, she saw a figure standing in the snow. It was impossible. It was a violation of every law of nature and magic. It was something that should never happen. Medius was alive, not as a vampire, not as a ghost, but as something entirely new. Something that transcended the categories of life and death, human and vampire, power and emptiness. He was standing at the boundary looking up at the mansion, his eyes glowing with a light that was neither red nor human, but something in between. And Lena understood in that moment that the story was not over. It was only beginning.